Hey vinyl community, Mark here again from Sound Matters, talking all things vinyl of course. Today's topic is how to grade used records. We're talking grading systems. So if you buy any vintage vinyl at all, and I know most of you do that watch this channel, or if you're looking to sell any aspects of your record collection, we're going to look at the correct way to grade those records so that you don't disappoint anybody or mislead anybody in terms of the condition of those records. But more importantly, hopefully you're going to get a better idea of what to look for when you're buying used records, either online or in your favourite record store. Let's get straight into the topic. So if you're selling off any aspects of your collection or just looking for that next piece of holy grail vinyl that you've been searching for, understanding how vinyl records are typically graded is a fundamental skill as a record collector. It's particularly important if you are selling records, you are a seller, you're a record store, or you sell online, as you want to give an accurate representation or indicator of the condition of those records. And it becomes particularly important in terms of the grading system when buying online, because you can't visually inspect those records and the consumer can't visually inspect those records in the same way. So it's particularly important when it comes to buying online, and there are some things you should look for, some tricks you can use in terms of assessing vinyl quality when buying online. But mostly today we're going to talk about how they should be graded typically and what is typically accepted as the standard definition for different levels of condition of records. Now, by far the most established and widely used system for grading records is called the Goldmine Standard. This is the same system that you'll find on websites such as Discogs, of course, and other websites such as eBay. And if you're a used record store, you probably use something very close to or similar to the Goldmine Standard. Now, there might be variations and deviations from this system, but generally speaking, this is accepted as kind of the general standard across the record collecting industry. So for the purpose of this video and this topic today, we'll be referring to the Goldmine Standard. So how does a grading system work? Well, typically a grade between mint and poor is given to both the record and the record sleeve separately. This is because there are often discrepancies between the condition of the cover and the condition of the record. That said, how well the cover is kept and looked after can be an indicator of the condition of the record inside, but that's not always the case. So it's important all the same to give a separate grade for the cover and the record. Now, with the Goldmine Standard, to give an overall grade for the entire piece, what they will do is they will combine both of those grades together and divide them by 2. Now, some sellers do this, other sellers do not, but it still remains very important to give a separate grade for both the record and the record sleeve. So how are the grades actually applied? Well, sadly, in most cases, it's a visual inspection under a strong light, which of course doesn't really give us any indicator as to how the record actually plays back, because a record can look, slightly scuffed and all that side of things, but still play back perfectly. And the reason this is obviously the case is most record stores don't have the time to actually audibly listen and check every single record that comes into their possession. That said, a good record store will take the time to audibly listen to very highly desirable collectible records such as first pressings and that side of things. The more desirable records, the more expensive potentially records that come into their possession, the more important it becomes for them to actually play those records back and give some sort of indicator of that playback quality. Now, if you are a seller online, I do highly recommend that you take that extra time to sit down and listen to every single record that you sell. After all, you need to protect your reputation online as a seller. So now onto the grades, of course, and what they typically mean, and we'll head over to the website for this, where there's a handy resource that you can check in your own time and come back to at your convenience based on the Goldmine Standard, of course. So link in the description below, you can check it out for yourself. So starting with mint condition records, and these are typically reserved as a grade for records that are brand new, sealed and unplayed, such as this one in my hand here. Now, they have to be, of course, perfect in every single way, hence why they're typically sealed and unplayed records. Now, you need to be very careful when grading a record mint, and you should always get a second opinion before applying any such grade. Okay, so near mint is next, of course, and these are records that are basically perfect in every single way. They may well have been opened, they may well have been played, but they are essentially as good as though they arrived from the factory, or from the record store yesterday. Now, you could take my copy of Searching for Mona Lisa by Santana as a near mint record. I have opened it, I have played it, but I haven't played it that often, and it's always been in this outer record sleeve, nicely protected. So you could cautiously grade this near mint if you wanted to. Now, of course, near mint records, although they've been opened and potentially played, you basically need to have them graded as though they are fault-free in every single way. So no ring wear, no scuffs, no scrapes, nothing, absolutely nothing on the record surface whatsoever. They are basically in perfect condition. They're just cautiously graded as near mint because maybe they've been open, maybe they've been played. You know, technically it's not a sealed record anymore, of course. Now, one advantage of a near mint record, of course, is that it's actually been played. You can actually assess it for any manufacturer defects, such as those annoying little bubbles you can sometimes get on the record surface, or off-center pressings or anything like that. Now, a lot of record stores, for various reasons and being cautious, of course, will never actually grade a record any higher than near mint. And I think this is actually a sensible practice. Next up in the system is Very Good Plus, or VG Plus. Some people use Excellent, or E, as a grading indicator. Now, these are records that, of course, are in excellent condition. Any minor scuffs, any very tiny imperfections should be very, very minor indeed, and should certainly not affect the playback quality of that record. Now, there might be some very, very minor warpage to the record surface. The Goldmine Standard will accept that, so it is incredibly minor and doesn't affect the playback in any way, shape, or form. There could be some light signs of kind of spindle wear, but in general terms, these are records that are in very good shape. Now, the same, of course, applies to grading the record sleeve. Any signs of shelf wear on a Very Good Plus record should be very minor indeed. Minor scuffs and that sort of things are acceptable. Some very, very minor degree of discoloration perhaps, but there certainly shouldn't be any major signs of things like large ring wear, such as the example you can see on the screen here. Anything like that where you've got a large amount of ring wear. This is actually my copy of Tales from Topographic Oceans by Yes, which is an interesting thing to note because we talked about the importance of grading the sleeve and the record separately, of course, and the reason this is important is because, you know, this is a perfect example. You've got the record quality of this I would have graded as Very Good Plus, certainly the actual record condition and the playback of that record, but the record sleeve, I would argue, because of that major ring wear, is no higher than Very Good, which is obviously the next grade we're going to get to in this topic. Now, you know, in my experience, many sellers tend to kind of overgrade their records, and so in my experience, really, I kind of tend to set Very Good Plus as the main kind of barrier to entry in terms of what I would consider buying as a record collector. Your experience may vary, of course, but I find that anything below Very Good Plus tends to become it's a lot riskier in terms of the actual quality you will get. If somebody grades something as Very Good Plus, there is a degree of risk because one man's near mint is another man's Very Good Plus, and so forth and so on. So there's a very good chance if you buy a Very Good Plus record, you may get something that is more accurately really represented as very good. So if you want to be cautious, Very Good Plus is a good standard to apply to the kind of records that you search for, particularly when looking online. Next is the VG, or Very Good category, and when we consider that VG records typically don't sell for any higher than 25% of that near mint value, whereas Very Good category records can sell anywhere up to 50% of that near mint value. It's fair to say there's a lot of bargains potentially to be found in the VG category. That said, we do need to consider the fact, of course, that a lot of the imperfections that would be picked up on a Very Good Plus record are going to be more exaggerated and more frequent within a Very Good record. Those light scuffs and scratches could be a little bit deeper perhaps, could be more frequent, and when we play the record, there's probably going to be some degree of surface noise, but it shouldn't be anything that's too overly distracting. It shouldn't be anything where there's too many pops and clicks that ruin the listening experience, and certainly not anything that causes major skipping or anything that stops the record from being a playable disc. But they're more than fair records that should be considered as an option for you, but exercise some caution, particularly when buying online, because as I said earlier, a lot of sellers tend to overgrade their records, and of course at this point there's a high risk that you end up with something that is not really considered a valuable playable record at this point. Now, album covers rated as very good, should be in sound structural condition, but may well look very well loved, but not trashed, you know, such as this copy of Santana's third album here that I have. Now, this could easily be graded a very good album cover. At a push, it could be graded very good plus, depending on how you were feeling and how generous you were feeling. The most important thing, I think, is that you're honest in the description of the defects on the album cover surface. So, you know, you may well have some visual signs of it being pulled in and out somebody's record collection, such as some minor ring wear that you have here, some scuffs on the edge of the record jacket. There might well be an element of minor split seams, that kind of side of things, but it shouldn't look trashed, and it should be more than acceptable as an album cover. It looks well loved, but it is still in pretty good shape, particularly given the age of the disc. Next up is good. Now, these are records that typically go between 10 to 15% of that near mint value, and they are acceptable records that play from start to finish without skipping, but they're significantly well loved and compromised by this point. You can expect quite a bit of surface noise from a good record, possibly some kind of actual groove wear in there as well, you know, and of course all those visual indicators are going to be there from the previous categories that we've talked about. When we look at the record sleeve, there's going to be some obvious signs of damage by this point, perhaps split seams, lots of heavy ring wear, and there could also be some interesting kind of extra additions that have been added, like in this example here, where there's kind of things like library stamps on here, or radio station letters and notes and things like that in there, lots of writing maybe on the record surface. They're going to be records that are, you know, they're acceptable, but they're something that a collector might pick up as a temporary kind of purchase until they can find potentially, hopefully, a better copy of that record. Next up, and the last two categories, of course, is poor and fair. Now, I'm going to skim over these fairly quickly because at this point, it's probably best to just walk away. My copy of Lionheart by Kate Bush could come into that category. It had no inner sleeve. The record is noisy from start to finish, and the sleeve has significant damage on here as well. Now, some people may at a push have been able to grade that record as good, and this is why some of this always remains somewhat subjective. But for me at this point, to my ears, that record is better served as a coffee coaster than it is a recorded medium. And so really we're looking at heavily compromised records, probably records that skip, probably records with significant scratches in there, heavy warping, maybe even some water damage to it, or you know, possibly even worse. These are records that essentially are basically trash at this point. So thank you ever so much for watching. That basically concludes today's video. Now, any grading system, of course, will always come with some degree of personal interpretation and artistic license applied by the individual, which is why I think it's always important to try and get a playback of that record, or maybe audio samples if you can. There's always some degree of risk when buying online in particular. Now, I want to hear from you, of course, down in the comments below. How do you find record grading? Do you find that, like in my experience, that Very Good Plus is a very good benchmark to set your purchasing standards? Let us know down in the comments below what your experience is. Do you use a different grading system to the one that I've mentioned today? Let us know what you use when you sell your records online down in the comments below. If you're new to this channel, please do consider subscribing, and we will see you in the next one. Cheers and keep spinning.